There will be no silly wand waving or incantations in this class. My name is Professor Brent Satterley. Nice to see you. Welcome to social work. And no, this is not Slytherin House. This is Gryffindor. But we're going to start with a little duel. Are there any students in this class? No students? All faculty? Are you a student?
Now I'm the moderator, but I have to referee this.
The niceties must be observed. What is spewed?
Society the motion of Elvis welfare.
Elvis welfare? Expelliarmus! Excellent! Let's give it a round of applause. Yes, please have a seat. Hi folks, my name is Dr. Brent Satterley. Nice to meet all of you. I know it's the afternoon, so I was like, oh, I gotta get them up and moving and doing something. So I am happy to be here. I am the director of the undergraduate social work program at Widener University in Chester, Pennsylvania. How many folks here have ever heard of Widener? Widener Pride. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about a number of different things. And one of those things is I'm going to talk to you about social justice and a class that I am teaching in the spring. And it's a brand new, it's a pedagogical potion. It's a new experiment. And I'm really excited, and I have tenure. So yeah! I am going to get a chance to do something and embrace something that I love and translate it into my classroom with a group of students. And in order to do that, though, you need to understand a little bit about where I'm coming from in the field of social work. Social work is, usually when I ask my students, why do you want to be a social worker, what do they say? I want to help people, right? All true. And the most important part of social work, actually, if you don't like people, it might not be a good profession for you. And so one of the pieces, though, about social work is that it's committed to vulnerable populations. We look from not as a glass half empty, but as a glass totally full, from a strengths-based perspective of the human condition. We look at a person and environment, why we feel like the biological and the psychological are a big part of who we are. We also believe that the environment is critical in how people live, grow, work, behave in light of the human condition. That's just a little bit about us. We come from a macro and a micro perspective. Micro being working with individual families and groups, and macro being working with communities, organizations from a global perspective, including policies and some of our basic tenets, which are right up here. Service, social justice, which I'm obviously going to come back to, the dignity and worth of the person, yes, even Bellatrix Lestrange, importance of human relationships, integrity, and competence. So that's a big part of it. Just so you know a little bit about us, that's social work within the context at Widener, our BSW program. Here's our lovely wordy mission. Basically what it says is we want to educate culturally competent generalist social workers. That is, social workers who have a commitment to working with folks who are disenfranchised, folks who are vulnerable, folks who are struggling, including a strong commitment to diversity, social justice, and addressing issues like poverty, hunger, etc., etc. So, in order to understand where this course is coming from, you have to understand a little bit about the theory that's behind it. And it's what I'm coining the pedagogy of fandom. It's a really exciting piece that I think is important. And as you can see here from this wonderful conglomerate, a la Jean-Luc, is telling us is that there's a lot of people who know lots of different things just about this little meme. Can you tell me about it? What is it?
Incorrect.
Star Wars. Incorrect. No, I'm wrong. All right. Star Wars. What else?
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. X-Files. What?
No.
Close. I suppose the truth is out there somewhere. But yeah, and of course, our beloved Harry Potter, right? Absolutely. So those are just some of the things here that are important to understand. Pop culture gets people excited. It gets people engaged. And I will tell you, as a professor in undergraduate and graduate and doctoral education, one of the things that's hardest about getting a group of students who have really busy lives to get engaged about something is to try to find something that motivates them, that they're excited about, that captivates them. And I will tell you that pop culture does that in many ways. And that's a big part of it. So the Spellcraft of Social Work, what is it that I'm going to be teaching? I'm going to be teaching basically a course that introduces Harry Potter. The students are actually told ahead of time, which I'll get to in just a minute, about what they need to know before they come into the class, and how they go about getting sorted into their houses and all that kind of good stuff, as well as understanding some of the aspects of social work that are really prominent in light of our mission and our values as a field. Issues related to diversity, issues related to social justice, issues related to intersectionality, issues related to macro and micro issues, how policies influence how an organization runs. But the idea here is that, did anybody get that? Yeah. But the idea here is looking at some of these components, including 3 different themes which I'll be focusing on. Transfiguration, the intersectionality of cultural identities. He who must not be named, power and privilege. Just an FYI, privilege being defined as the unearned, invisible, and often undeserved granting of power and status. So for instance, someone who has able-bodied privilege, for instance, might have a difficult time, obviously, not even ever thinking about walking upstairs, right? And yet if you were in a wheelchair, it might take you a little bit to figure out where the elevator is, just to get up and down various stairs at institutions, Chestnut Hill, Widener, I know, in that context, around that's the nature of privilege. We often don't think about it until it affects us, right? And social workers have to think about it all the time. About their clients, about the various systems they function in, and engage in that context. And finally, the quintessential social worker, Harry Potter as the change agent. A lot of what social work is about is empowering people. Gutierrez defines empowerment as the trying to be able to give people some kind of power and control over their lives. Magic. Right? And that's one of the pieces that I want to emphasize here in this course. Some course topics we'll be looking at in 3 separate segments. Polyjuice Potion, becoming yourself in a world of otherness. You need to know who you are as a social worker before you can go out and help other people. You need to know where your buttons are, you need to know where your triggers are, and I don't shy away from that stuff in my classes, just ask my students. Why? Because they are going to encounter clients who push those buttons. Carl Jung says, you will have the clients you need and deserve. Right? And so that's one of the part of it. Muggles, purebloods, and squibs, the intersectionality of identities. I'm going to do a whole section on looking at Draco Malfoy as the quintessential privileged young man. Being able to look at aspects of white guilt, socioeconomic privilege, and aspects of it both in terms of sexism, race, and class, and how those things translate in the world of Harry Potter, and how those things translate in our practice and understanding of social work. The Triwizard Tournament. I'll talk to you a little bit about that. That's actually going to be our midterm. Group identity and social justice, I'll get to that. Horcruxes, secrecy and trauma. The theme that goes through all of our courses at Widener is the impact of trauma. And it's a thread that goes through all of our curriculum in terms of how does trauma affect an individual around policy, in groups, in organizations, historically, human behavior in the social environment, all those kinds of things, individuals, families, and groups. Trauma is part of it. Rumi says being born is traumatic. And all you have to do is turn on TV or Facebook or YouTube or Twitter to see all kinds of lovely trauma things. Have you seen the debate? Never mind! Defense against the dark arts, obviously advocacy and oppression. One of the things social work prides itself on is standing up. Social workers rise is part of our mantra. We want to stand up and not give voice to the voiceless because we want to help them find their own voice. Big difference there. We want to remove barriers that prevent people from being able to be heard, seen, and known. And that's part of our work together. Obviously, looking at the nature of oppression, both in terms of overt and covert oppression. Well, of course, there we're talking about the isms, racism, sectarianism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, ableism, etc., etc. Big part of Islamophobia, big part of the work that we do, we have to understand in that context. And finally, from a more policy and macro perspective, the Ministry of Magic and their ethical use of power and authority, Big Brother, the trace, right? All those pieces are going to be part of this particular class. So some questions we're going to be considering just as an example. What does Spew and the House Elves Indentured Servitude tell us about human trafficking, slavery, and freedom? How does the Ministry of Magic's governance and use of power inform ethical social work practice with the disenfranchised? How does studying at Hogwarts illuminate the intersectionality of identities in a pluralistic society? How does Draco Malfoy's exploration of his pure-blood privilege and prejudice reflect white guilt and racism? What role does he who must not be named play in the proliferation of fear, hatred, and oppression? And finally, what role does Harry Potter play as the change agent? So spending a lot of time on that. The letter. My students are engaging in pre-registration right now. In other words, they are registering now. When registration finishes, I'm sitting down and preparing a letter and sending it to Mary Smith, the cupboard under the stairs that's going to arrive at their house over Thanksgiving. And at that, they will end up having sorting instructions. They'll have to go to Pottermore and get sorted into their houses and send me their feedback. Now, one of the challenges from a pedagogical point of view is I want 4 houses. They need to be just about equal size. Now, so being able to try to gather data from the students is going to be one of the questions. They have to answer a series of questions for me as well to be able to kind of figure out, and I'm going to be sorting them into their houses. Just because what they get on Pottermore isn't necessarily what they're going to be in the class. That's just the reality of that. And there will have also other pre-course preparations, including what I call the nature of the cosmopolitan classroom. From the book, actually, that's recent, Teaching in the Hood, the Houses and the Cosmopolitan Classroom perspective, is Emden's perspective of the cosmopolitan classroom is really that the good of the one supports the good of the many. This all will be explained in their letter. And the idea here is that when a student struggles or does poorly perhaps on an assignment, they will be paired with a tutor in Gryffindor or from their house. And they will then resubmit the assignment or retake the test. And if they improve, those points go to the house, right? And the student who tutors them, because that's asking extra from that student, right, also gets points to go to the house. Here's the kicker. Bad behavior, and you lose points. Bad behavior from your house members, you lose points. You show up class late, you lose points. You're on your phone, it goes into Azkaban. I'm not kidding. Actually, that's great. Like, if there's things that hang off the back of doors that are like to hold shoes, that's going to be Azkaban, where your phones end up going if you're on them. So, sorry, you're out in that sense. So that's part of this. It's a different kind of class. It's not the kind of class that you just take lightly. It's not a 300 level, easy cheesy elective. It's a commitment. And that's part of the experience of that. The midterm, the Triwizard Tournament, is basically going to be, of course, 3 tasks. But the goal of the Triwizard Tournament is international magical cooperation. In this sense, I'm framing it as inter-house magical cooperation. They will create 4 different Triwizard Tournament teams, 1 from each house, right? Or 2 from each house. There will be a representative from all 4 houses there. And they will be asked, or rather required for the midterm, to prepare a take-home 4-question essay exam where each house member prepares a question based on the house characteristics as applied to a social problem. In other words, what role does cunning play, or bravery play, or intelligence play, what have you, addressed to poverty, or homelessness, or drug and alcohol addiction, or those kinds of things, and coming up with a particular question there. They will then have to take another teammate's take-home exam, where one member from each house will complete a specific section prepared by a student from a different house. And then finally, participate in a team-based in-class case example structured activity about a social problem that's given to them in class. So they will have to, at the beginning of the course, they will build in solidarity the experiences of their house. Midterm, the Triwizard Tournament is going to force them to figure out how to play well in the sandbox with others. And that's one of the big skills of social work that you have to learn in this context. And finally, ending with a large group debrief. As I mentioned, it is in fact a pedagogical potion. This is the first time I made it. I'm excited because I'm going to be using some of the literature actually that some of the really learned authors have contributed that are downstairs, that are as part of my class, and that's really exciting. And having an opportunity to do some of this work with my students with something that I love, I'm hoping is really wonderful and fulfilling for the students in that sense. Hopefully none of them will have to get a howler, but they will in fact be getting howlers if they don't pay attention, do well in class, so that they're also, and just as an FYI, that's part of also assessment processes for students to know how they're doing in class, pedagogically from a theoretical point of view. We know that students who know how they're doing better in class, as well as what's expected of them, ultimately are more successful in that experience. References and any questions?